it's about slowing down, and I mean, there's a time and place for everything, isn't it? And this is about spending time with the family, getting some exercise, and connecting with nature, learning a bit about heritage and history, and learning about the gardens. Or it might be you're one of our members, you just come because you walk the dog here every day, but you want to do that in a really nice, safe environment, because that in Painshill everyone's had to come for a turnstile, so there's not going to be people you might sometimes find in a park, that's open access, who've just been, whatever. So I think that's the crucial thing that we offer, and.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how many A's are in your fantastic today?
Well, let's count. I am fantastic.
I counted 17 A's.
Oh, good. Nice.
I'm doing really well. Question for you. What do you think of if I were to say cultural tourism?
What I think of when you say cultural tourism is the opportunity when you go and travel and you're touring around, that you get to learn about the culture or the history or the heritage of a particular area, whether that's through visiting a location or going on a tour or listening to a story, that kind of thing.
What I think is really interesting about the attractions industry as a whole is when you think of destination tourism and theme parks and FECs, and then you look at the cultural side of tourism, there's so many elements that are similar, even if the product itself is distinctly different. And what's interesting is there's oftentimes kind of this line in the sand between the two, as far as differences in their mission, differences in the way that they operate, differences in what their goal is for their guests or visitors to take away from them when they leave. But so many of the nuts and bolts and the building blocks of them are identical, or at least very similar. Would you agree with that?
100%. In fact, you and I have had this conversation before where, depending on if you're working at a theme or an amusement park or a cultural visitor attraction, you're going to call the people that visit you very different things, whether it's a patron or visitor or guest, or, do you quantify yourself as a theme park, or, do you even take the word park out of it and say, no, we're an attraction, or not an attraction, we're a museum. So there's a lot of words that are thrown around, I think, a lot of times and people get very attached to those. I think at the end of the day, we're here to either educate, entertain, thrill, and we do it in very, very different ways depending on the type of facility you're at. So whether it's cultural, whether it's, a kind of a standard quote unquote theme park, and we have different missions. At the end of the day, you want people to be able to say, hey, that was an enjoyable experience and I want to do it again, or I want to tell people about it.
Mm-hmm. And what I think is really interesting about this, and this leads into who our guest is today, Paul Griffiths is the Director of Painshill, which is on the southwest side of London in the UK. And the way that he describes Painshill, which is a garden, it is almost an art museum in the style of a beautifully landscaped property. The way that he describes the elements of it, I interpret it in very similar ways as the way that theme parks are designed, but not in a way that there are rides and there are fried foods and there's, music and shows and things like that, but in the way that you are creating a location-based experience for your guests to be immersed in something. And in this case, with Painshill, it is history, it is culture, it is heritage, and it is inspiration from a gentleman named Hamilton, who back in the 18th century was an explorer and a traveler And many people who would explore and travel would come back with specific goods and merchandise and foods and things like that. And he came back with his memories. And from his memories, built this garden. And basically these follies, we're going to talk about what follies are, which I think is so interesting. And it has a lot of theme park components of it, while distinctly being not a theme park, because it is a cultural, historic, heritage tourism, but I will use the word attraction at the end of that.
Yeah, because I mean, anytime you want people to come to you, you need to attract them, which is the base of the word attraction, right?
Exactly.
So we want to attract people to Painshill or a Disney or Universal or Carowinds or wherever it is. What I think is really fascinating is, you know, how Paul talks about the different follies and what it means to actually go to Painshill, because it's a very different experience than someone might think of as going to a Disney or a Carowinds or a Six Flags, because it's not about, you know, kind of speed and adrenaline. It's actually about slowing down. And I love the fact that when he talks about the school groups coming, he says there's no screens, right? They're out there, they're building things, they're in nature. And I think there's so much education and inspiration you can get from those kind of experiences that we need to curate those a little bit more for the people in our world, so that we can have those experiences and we can learn from those and again be inspired.
For sure. And the way that Paul covers all of that is so interesting. This is going to be a great interview. And I would say let's just get right to it.
Let's do it. Paul Griffiths from Painshill, thank you so much for joining the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Hi, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We are so excited to chat with you today. Thank you again for contributing to the 200th episode. Really loved that submission. Would love to learn more about you and Painshill today. So let's just kind of take it away. Tell us a little bit about Paul.
Well, yeah, gosh. Well, I've worked in the sort of tourism industry now for too many years. It's 25 years or so sort of straight out of uni and then into that industry. So I've known nothing else, to be honest with you guys. So I started with English Heritage, which is the name England's sort of key heritage body, very similar to the National Trust, which, you know, listeners might be aware of. And I started with those in the sort of, I got a job in the office after leaving uni, you know, making the tea and doing all those crucial jobs that need doing before moving into visitor services very soon afterwards. And from there, sort of worked my way up through different areas of English heritage and ended up in the most fabulous job as area manager for the London Historic Properties. So I had sort of 12 sites around London. So spent a lot of time rushing around the capital, which, if you guys have been to London, is an amazing city. And, you know, I love that a lot. Before moving down to Portsmouth to the Mary Rose, where we were opening a brand new £35 million museum, which was just the most brilliant experience. So I got the job as head of operations down there, firstly to sort of set the team up and the sort of visitor experience strategy for opening and recruiting the team and that side of things. And so had 6 amazing years where we attracted over 2 million visitors in that time to the museum, which, because it's a museum in the docks in Portsmouth, was a huge number of people and you know, considerably more than had ever come down there before. So, and then moved to Painshill Park, which I know we'll talk a bit more about Painshill in a while, but Painshill Landscape Garden, I moved here as to the sort of senior post as director, so the feeding just into a board of trustees in November 2018. So I've been here nearly 3 years now. That's an incredibly quick potted history.
So you said that this is all you've ever done right out of university. So why this industry? Why tourism? Why heritage? Was it, you know, just go back to your upbringing? Were you a consumer, a guest? Or you were you just always immersed into, you know, the history of the UK? Why did you choose this industry?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. There's a couple of really easy answers. So yes, going back to childhood, we were always on days out and visiting, you know, attractions, theme parks. They were in their infancy. Didn't see when I was younger, particularly in this country. We were going on holiday to Florida when I was about 12. You know, most amazing experience of visiting those unbelievable theme parks. We're in the mid 80s now at this point. But ended up really in this industry when I was at uni. I was studying a leisure management course, and my initial sort of vision from that was to go into maybe more sports side of things. I'd always been fascinated by, you know, sport and loving playing football and cricket and, you know, sports like that. And the sad realization had dawned on me that I was never going to become a professional sportsman. And, you know, take the stage at Wembley Stadium or something, you know, playing for England. So I thought I'd go into the business side of it. But while I was there, I was so fortunate to have a month's work experience. You know, when you go out of uni and you have a time in an employer, which is saying that unis do so much more now than they did in my time. And I spent at a place called Hever Castle, which was Anne Boleyn, who was one of Henry VIII's wives. It was her childhood home. And it was just the most fascinating time I spent there. And this was after my first year at uni. And in second years and onwards, you had to specialise in a subject. And one of those specialisms you could do was heritage management. And a lot of that was around, you know, the sort of opening of heritage attractions and the guest experience side of things. So after spending that amazing month there and I spent it with their visitor experience manager, and he had just an unbelievably amazing job. You know, it was just gorgeous site, meeting the public, dealing with minor issues, you know, touring around in different parts of the attraction, from the gift shop to the castle to, you know, putting on events. So I came back and spoke to my tutors and decided to specialise in heritage management. So did that for the next 2 years, and that's what I graduated with a degree in. And that was like, right, I need to get into this line of work. I've studied in it. I want to do heritage. And so I was extremely lucky to get a sort of very entry-level job and, you know, work in English Heritage offices, which, you know, wasn't the world's most exciting job, but it was an entry in. And from there, was able to move up within EH or English Heritage, rather, using abbreviations is bad, isn't it? And then move on from there. So yeah, so it's a love of mine. Whenever I'm away from here, I'll be visiting places still, and you know, and although I've always worked in heritage, I've always looked to the other sectors of leisure and tourism. So you know, I think one of the reasons I find your guys' podcast so fascinating is when you talk to people in the real sort of theme park world and stuff, and I'm always looking at those and saying, well, how can we learn from that? And you know, places like Disney obviously achieve such great gold standards, and you can, you know, so many people have written books on it and podcasts on it and stuff, that there's always stuff you could learn. So yeah, and that's how I got into that business. But I just love the customer service element. In fact, when I was at school, I would have been about 12 or so, 13. I don't know if you have this in the US, but you have careers advisors in England that would come in and sit down and type things into a computer, and then there's a long sheet would come out. I mean, I'm sure it's much better now. And it came out that I should be a hotel manager. And my mum was like, oh, you're never going to be able to do that. You know, but actually you could see now, looking back, it was actually really quite accurate, because of course that involves all the areas of hospitality and, you know, guest service that I've spent my career working in. So yeah, there was obviously that computer that filed out. It's obviously more intelligent than we thought.
Yeah, so I guess the moral of the story is listen to your counselor when they talk about your career choice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen to your teachers, kids. It's well worth it.
Yeah, stay in school. Paul, you and I have something in common, because when I was growing up, I wanted to play American football, and realized I was too short and too slow to be able to do that as a career. But you know, just love the sport of it. But I want to hear more a little about Painshill, because that's where you are now, and you know, certainly you have a great history in the industry. But it just seems like such a fascinating property. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about kind of how it came to be and what it is for people who've never heard of it?
Yeah, and I wouldn't blame any of your listeners for not hearing it, because that's been one of our major issues since I arrived 3 years ago. It's been really sort of trying to push out the story of Painshill a lot more to the public. So Painshill was an 18th century landscape garden. There was a chap called Charles Hamilton, who was an Irish aristocrat who lived in the UK, studied at university over here. He went off on the grand tours of Europe. Now, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. They were sort of the 18th century version of the university gap year, that, you know, it was ways of going out and educating yourself. And in those days it was seen as, you know, you needed to travel around Europe to do that. And so he did 2 grand tours, and these were sort of full on experiences. You were gone for months, if not years at a time. He came back full of inspiration for the amazing architecture he'd seen across Italy, particularly, and Spain and Germany. And he created this. A lot of the people who went on these grand tours would come back with huge amounts of stuff. They would, you know, buy and, you know, trade and stuff. But he came back with just most of it in his mind, really. Bought this plot of land in Cobham, and that's where Painshill is, which is a village called Cobham. And so, for listeners, we're sort of just south of London, really. And if you were looking on a map, you'd pinpoint London as where we are to put it into perspective for you guys. So he built this garden. he was here for 35 years, and it was one of the very first what was seen as what was called the English landscape garden. If before that everything was very formal, so think of somewhere like Versailles in Paris that you know listeners may know, you know, everything was very formal gardens. This is much more natural, and you let trees grow and you experimented with new plants. And he was bringing plants over from the States, one of the first people to do that. They came in sort of what was called mixed boxes from a chap who would travel into, well, the drawings and stories are literally him traveling into what was the Wild West, I guess, and collecting samples of you know, of plants and trees and stuff. And these boxes would turn up. And I don't know if you have this in the US, but in Europe it's quite popular. You'd order boxes of like fruit and veg that would turn up every week as organic stuff or meat, and you don't know what's going to be in it, and then you open it up and that's what you'll have for your dinner that week. So it was a bit like that. This box would arrive with various plants in from the States, and he would plant them and then see what happens. So it wasn't like a catalogue saying you're going to get this lovely tree like we might do nowadays. He would get the stuff planted. So Hamilton was here for 35 years. Sadly, he ran out of money, a familiar topic in Painshill's history, and moved and sold the land and moved on. It was then looked after by a succession of you know, people who bought the estate after that, and they had no reason to do so. You know, they didn't have to keep it as it was. The Second World War came about. There was a lot of troops stationed here, from particularly a lot of Canadian troops, and after the war, the site was sold off piecemeal and just basically fell into complete disrepair. It was completely overgrown. The buildings, which are called follies in the landscape, had become quite damaged. And in the 1970s, there was a real campaign to save Painshill. You know, people recognising that this absolute fine landscape garden, which has been inspirational for gardens across Europe, across the United States as well. Monticello has influences from Painshill. You know, there's that sort of stuff. So we, you know, this campaign was formed. The local authority purchased the land, and then the trust was a completely independent charity, was set up to firstly restore the landscape and then open it and keep it safe for now and future generations. So that's the quickest of potted history lessons I can give you and your listeners.
So Paul, you mentioned that you said you wouldn't be surprised if people weren't familiar with Painshill, and curious as to why that is. And you've even been quoted saying that one of the biggest issues that you're facing is that even people locally aren't too familiar with Painshill. Why is that, if it's such a historic attraction with such a rich history that you just gave us that really quick synopsis on, and then also what are you able to do to kind of help bring more awareness?
Yeah, I guess, Josh, what you summed up there is the sort of problem I inherited when I arrived. That, you know, Painshill wasn't very well known. It gone through some difficult times. I won't get into too much detail, but it gone through some difficult times, and we were therefore had this sort of. When I was looking at and applying for this job, there was just so many quick wins that you think, yeah, we could do that, we could do that, we could do that, and you know, stuff I've done in the past. And you know, one of the first things we do was just raise awareness of Painshill. One of the issues was that they didn't really have a definitive, what you might call, strapline. You know, there was all these different titles that we'd given ourselves over the years, none of which really helped sell Painshill. So there's nothing to really put all our efforts on and you know, get behind. And they'd use phrases like the most tranquil 18th century landscape in Europe. Well, for you, tranquil might put a lot of families off, because I mean, I've got a 9-year-old son, or 8.5-year-old son, and you know, I wouldn't fancy going somewhere that was described as tranquil, because I know he is not going to be tranquil while we're going around this site. You know, so there was putting people off. Or landscape garden, what does that mean? You know, that sounds a bit, you know, you've got to be into horticulture. So there was all sorts of titles like that. One of them was the Hamilton landscapes, and you're like, well, no one's heard of Hamilton. If you know, unless you're a real landscape garden historian, it's not going to mean anything to you. So you know, one person recently in the estate told me that for years he'd driven past and thought it was an old people's home, because he just didn't get that's what it was. You know, there's this garden behind here. It just looked like it was something that was a place to go and rest in your later years. So we employed the services of an amazing consultant called Scott, who works for a company called the Cambridge Group. And he did this brilliant branding exercise to come up with our strapline of where the walk is a work of art. And that just touched it brilliantly. So we've been able to use that, and our marketing team been able to use that to really push Painshill out there and start to generate more visitors, more visitors mean more income, obviously sometimes more cost, but that's where we are. I think others also, the fact that the gardens have been lost for so many years and really didn't start restoration until the early 1980s means that for a lot of people of sort of 40-year-old, my age plus, don't have it in their heritage that they used to come and visit when they were kids, because it wasn't here, or it was here, but it was in such a state you wouldn't have come. And for many years when the estate was first able to open, it was only open 1 or 2 days a week, and it was very limited numbers, and there was not really any publicity, there was no events, there was no tea room for a long time. Got to get those crucial things right, haven't you? People need toilets and they need a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So so that's where we are. So we're really in a position of now trying to really go, let's push get ourselves out there. During the awful periods we've had in the pandemic, we've been fortunate that because we're an outdoor attraction, we've been able to be open for quite a long time. We were only closed for 9 weeks. We were one of the first places in the country as an attraction to reopen after the first lockdown in early 2020, and we've been able to stay open ever since, because thankfully the government saw that the benefits of gardens were there for people to exercise and for get out and if they were ticketed, they could control numbers and social distance, so actually they allowed them to stay open. So brilliantly, we've had 3 main lockdowns in the UK, and the second and third ones we were actually listed as places that could stay open, which was great. So we're going in the right direction in so many ways. A couple of years ago we were attracting 75,000 visitors a year. We're now over 200,000 a year. So we've gone. I mean, I know those numbers are minuscule for many of your listeners who run major theme parks, but for a small sort of landscape garden in Surrey in England, that's quite a big leap of numbers.
Well, yeah, just the leap from 75,000 to 200,000, that's a big leap. So operationally, I'm sure you've got to make changes to take care of that. I'd like to go back to what you said, because before we started recording, we were talking about the follies, and that was fascinating how you kind of described those. So for our listeners, especially here in America, can you tell us a little bit more about the follies?
Yeah, of course I can. So it's a folly. You find them in a lot in stately homes around Europe, and particularly in the UK, and they're buildings that you may, and you probably in America as well. You stumble across them when you're out in the wider parts of the estate, and for no apparent reason there'll suddenly be something like a tower or a temple or and they were very, very popular part of that 18th century. And for Hamilton, it was all about the architecture he'd seen in Europe. So Painshill is what they call a circular walk. So you start at one point, you circle around, you end up back at point A. Perfect for a walk or a run. Josh, you should come do one of your runs around Painshill. It's perfect for it, because you can do your 5K in just one circuit. It's perfect.
I'm on my way.
Yeah, cool. We'll do it together. So it's so the follies are around there. So they are all sorts of different buildings. So we have, in no particular order, a ruined abbey, which was built as a ruin. So Hamilton built that as the way to picture this is they often feel like stage sets. So they weren't necessarily built to last, which is another part of our problem, is why they're not in a great state. So he would build these sort of stage sets almost, so that as people toured his grounds, they would see these sort of amazing structures. And the ruined abbey was built as a ruin. So guests may think this abbey has been here since Henry VIII's time of the Reformation, but actually it'd been built 2 weeks ago. It was that. So we have that. We have a Turkish tent that's based on the tents that Hamilton's seen as part of the Ottoman Empire. We have a Palladian bridge, Chinese bridge. A grotto is the most amazing of our structures, actually, and it is literally, it's complete and utterly man-made, but most people go in and think it has to be natural, because the job that has been done, firstly in building in the first place, and then the restoration work that was done by Clifton Conservation, just such a good standard that you think you are in a natural grotto or a cave, to use another word. So Hamilton's seen lots of them in Italy, even natural ones on the Amalfi Coast, or ones in Renaissance gardens. So as you walk around, you've got this sort of immersive experience, and the grotto is a particularly immersive experience, because you go in for a very narrow tunnel, which is meant to generate sort of two emotions: fear, but also a sort of, I want to know what's coming next. And it's a bit, like I don't know, going on a really scary roller coaster. You want to go on it because you want to know what it's going to be like, but at the same time you're terrified, because you're thinking, I don't know if I'm going to like this. And as you're strapped in and you're clicking your way up the hill, thinking this is a really bad idea. But so you're going through the tunnel of the grotto in the 18th century, thinking what's going to be in here. And he had the most amazing uses of technology in the 18th century. He had a water feature which would be pumped by one of his attendants when there was a sort of I'm trying to describe this, and it's not probably coming across very well on a podcast that most people are listening to and driving to work. But there's a gap in the grotto that this assistant could have seen through and seen guests coming. He starts mentally pumping away. He then leaves scene, exit stage left, as it were. And as the guests come through, this water is merrily flowing down through the grotto, making it feel like a totally natural thing. So you've gone through this tunnel hearing water, thinking, gosh, where am I going? In you go to the main chamber, which is just beautiful. And then there's water trickling down. And little do you know, 2 minutes ago, there was a chap there pumping away. We have a mechanical pump to do it now for visitors. So I don't have to send one of the team out to do any pumping every time visitors are coming around, thankfully. But yeah, so that's quite a long answer to your question about follies. But they make the park and make what makes Painshill, I think, a very special place. And for Hamilton, they were what he was drawing visitors in to see what he created.
Well, we appreciate the long answer of that and the additional detail on that. And the way that my gears are turning here from the way that you describe that, Paul, is when you look at the greater attractions industry globally. You have tourism focused, man-made attractions and theme parks, and then there's the cultural and heritage side of that. And I know that there's even some sensitivity on the not-for-profit or the heritage side of even calling it an attraction or being very tourist-driven because it wants to be so focused on the history and the heritage. But the way that you describe that, and I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, but this sounds like a theme park in a way that there are man-made structures based off of Hamilton's memory of his experiences and his adventures that he's now recreating for the enjoyment and immersive entertainment of whether it's tourists or locals. So how do you define what Painshill really is? That it is a historic heritage attraction, but it has many of those elements of what you would see if you visit a theme park.
It's a fascinating way of looking at it. I won't call it a theme park because in case this gets heard by my trustees, I don't think they'll be too happy. But because that's the things we have to try and avoid it, and that's one of the fears. I don't know if you have this so much in the US, but certainly in this country, if heritage sites start to do some stuff, they do tend to, this phrase that's used in this country all the time, which drives me mad in some ways, is Disneyfication. And I don't know if you hear that in the US, but that whole, they've Disneyfied it because they've done X, Y, or Z. In many cases, it's actually, they've just done something to either make it more exciting or more interesting or actually get an audience in. And, if you stay too stagnant and you don't develop or make it interesting for visitors, then no one's going to come. And, we're an independent charity. We rely on income we bring in through our visitor activities to survive. Without that, Painshill won't be here and there won't be a 18th century landscape garden for visitors to come and see. I love the way that you described that there, Josh, as being, Hamilton's, it was, and I guess I've never really thought of it that way, but he was generating a site, man-made, for people to come, for his own, ego, whatever, but also people we know came in to see it and they would tip the gardeners to give them a tour around. And that tip, I understand through various bits of research people have done, was part of their wages. So, it was clearly it was a visitor attraction in some ways because Hamilton was doing that. But I think, we are a cultural heritage destination. We are, and I think I touched on this in the bit we did for your 200th episode, was the fact that what we are is there for people, for well-being, for getting in touch with nature. We know people have found, particularly during the pandemic, this is a place that they can come and escape reality and escape the horrors of what's going on. Every time, even now still, here we are recording this in, mid-August, and still the news is full of horrors every day. It certainly is in the UK of, what's going on next and which country we're not going to be able to visit next. And I think people are actually enjoying coming here, for their well-being, for getting out in the open, for doing that. So, there's so many, things that, we can do. But as I said earlier on, I'm always looking at, what the wider attractions industry is doing, because I think you can just get inspiration from that in terms of, we've all got to deliver a great guest service, haven't we? That's what we're all there for at the end of the day. Whatever attraction you are, you need visitors to go home, hopefully, saying they've had a lovely time, putting something on social media and saying they've had a lovely time, and telling their friends, because word of the mouth is so important, isn't it? Particularly for us as a small attraction, I need people to come out here and say, you must go and visit Painshill. It's absolutely amazing. I didn't know it was there, for example. And that's certainly happened in the last 12 months. So I wouldn't describe it as a theme park, but I think it's fair to say that some of the stuff Hamilton was doing was probably a forerunner for that, should we say.
Definitely.
He wasn't Walt Disney, but he was, getting people to enjoy it.
Well, and I hate to draw too many comparisons to theme parks, but we talk about escapism as well. Theme parks, family entertainment centers, cultural attractions, a lot of it is about escape. And I love the way you talk about, Painshill being a place where people can go and kind of relax and retouch with nature and have a nice walk and get some fresh air. And it's actually good for your health. I'm curious though, as you talk about this walk being a work of art, which I love that phrase, how that compares to what we hear and talk about so much when it comes to technology, right? And everybody wants the latest and greatest technology, and they're wanting their experiences and their attractions to reflect that as well. This is a very different approach, right? There isn't, a ton of technology coming at you. You're there to slow down and relax. So how has that been maybe part of your differential equation, that this isn't, the hustle and bustle, but it's a little slower? So how have you kind of managed that difference?
I think you've summed that up well. I think, we aren't overly technical, if that's the right word. We haven't got screens left, right and centre. And funny enough, I was talking to someone this morning about our education programme and the fact that, we were sold out in the spring and summer term for schools. And our summer camps at the moment are running because we're in the middle of the school summer holidays in the UK. And, we'll have 10, 12 children come a day who go out with our education team and are out in the landscape for the whole day. There's not a screen in sight. They haven't got an iPad, they haven't got an iPhone, they might have them on, but they're not using them. They are getting used to nature, they're den building, they're climbing trees, they're doing stuff that we probably did as kids before, everyone had a phone in their pocket, certainly did, So that's very important to us. I mean, we've introduced some areas of technology, such as, that we do have an audio tour now that you can listen to on your iPhone. So actually, as you go around, you can listen to a number of our team talking about different areas of Painshill. But you're right, it's about slowing down. And I mean, there's a time and place for everything, isn't it? And this is about, spending time with the family, getting some exercise, and connecting with nature, learning a bit about heritage and history, and learning about the gardens. Or it might be you're one of our members, you just come because you walk the dog here every day, but you want to do that in a really nice, safe environment, because that in Painshill everyone's had to come for a turnstile. So, there's not going to be people you might sometimes find in a park, that's open access, who've just been, whatever. So I think that's the crucial thing that we offer. And I find it fascinating when people are talking on your podcast, like your own great show, that of how they've generated rides and different experience stuff. We had a guy a few weeks ago talking about how he generates different experience stuff and what they were doing there. Brilliant stuff. And I'm always thinking, well, what can we do there? But I'm not going to suddenly build a log flume going down one of the hills into the lake, because that just wouldn't be right. And everything we try to do here goes back to within that 35-year window that Hamilton was here. So my landscape team won't plant a tree that wouldn't have been available in the 18th century, and some of the trees that are, I'll walk around the grounds or maybe go for a run after our interview, and, there's stuff out there now that's been growing since Hamilton's time. We have the largest cedar tree in Europe, and that was planted by Hamilton. And there's living, growing, testament to the work of Charles Hamilton all those years ago.
How can you determine what's next as far as what is going to continue to keep visitors engaged, keep them coming back? When you say, of course, you say you're not going to build a log flume going into the lake, so maybe it's not about embracing new attraction types or even new technology, but being able to preserve a lot of the I would say the heritage and the charm of what people are coming for, but are able to do it so there isn't necessarily just a been there, done that, check that off the list, but there's that reason to continually come back.
I think, because it's somewhere to come and walk and to exercise, naturally there will be that returning factor. So I can think of places that I would go to and I visit once and I think, well, I don't need to go there until they do something different or build a new ride or whatever else. But here, by nature, I have guests who come virtually every day and they will walk a couple of runs around, a big walk around the lake, and they'll sit have a cup of coffee. And I'm on first name terms with guests. I've never been on first name terms with guests before in my career, because I'm seeing these people every day and they'll shout across the park, "Hi Paul," and I'll shout back, "Hi Dave," whatever, So actually it's a really nice environment. What we need to do is keep bringing ways of generating new experiences of people, and we've particularly done that this year with a number of events. So within our walled garden, we've done comedy and theatre this year, which is outside of the normal hours, so encouraging people to come in outside of hours, enjoy comedy, enjoy theatre. What was great about that is because we started these and we were still in restrictions, comedians were playing for the first time in so long that they were actually able to have an audience, and there they were in a gorgeous walled garden. So it felt like a brilliant thing. We've done music nights, so we've expanded our events program, particularly out of hours. So you're doing stuff out of hours. We've done a number of installations in the last couple of years around working with a local company, which is always a big tick for me. If you're working with someone local, that you're helping the local community and businesses, and they build like large models, if you like, of we've had dragons, we've had jungle animals and winter animals, and we'll position them around the park. And now this sounds a very basic experience, but people actually loved going out around the landscape and ticking off when they found the polar bear or the penguins. Now, none of these were animatronic, none of these were doing anything really funky. They were just there. But I think it was just because it's almost going back to a sort of more humble experience, if you like, that you're still just walking the landscape and finding stuff. We're planning to do dinosaurs at Christmas this year. Again, they won't be moving and roaring and doing anything exciting in that sense, but people will still, touch wood, and I hope come to see them. So it's things like that. It's not detracting from the fact that this is a heritage site. This is it's a grade 1 listed garden, which is a system we have in the UK for protection. So if something's really valuable or important, it will get grade 1 or 2 status. Same with buildings. And doing things that are non-interventional. So what it means by that is we're not building something new. And what we did build was a children's play area about a year and so ago. So we built that, but we built that out of the historic area. So it's a site. It's near the cafe conveniently, so parents can grab a latte or something. Kids can play in and play area. That was a natural play area, which was all built from wood from the estate. So again, it didn't feel like we'd stuck a load of plastic in the park. It just fits and looks natural. So yeah, that what next question is one I regularly ask myself and ask the team, because we've got to keep doing stuff. And this year, as I said earlier, we've introduced an audio tour. Next little thing we'll do, so it's little things like that. For us it's about staying financially sustainable so the park can survive, because it's always going to be a struggle. We're not going to be investing in huge new roller coasters, because that's just not us, and that's just not how we'll be. But again, there is a place for that, and I love that industry as well. So it's I love going to visit theme parks. I love terrifying myself on roller coasters. But not been doing that enough recently, of course.
Yeah, Paul. Speaking of that, do you have a favorite roller coaster or attraction outside of Painshill?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, isn't it? I took my son to Disneyland Paris last would have been 2019. Gosh, it's flown by, and there was some great rides there. Absolutely terrified by the Tower of Terror. I've never been so scared in all my life, I don't think, bouncing up and down that. But then I went. I don't know if you guys. I don't think this is in the US yet, but the Ratatouille ride that I think they're building in Epcot was in the studios bit, and because obviously you're in Paris, that was just the most amazing immersive experience I'd ever encountered. We went about 3 or 4 times. I was just like, this is just wow. It just, you felt like you was in the film. I just thought it was just brilliant. And I know, I'm sure they are building it in the US. So there's something for you guys to check out when it's over there.
Yeah. So Paul, one thing we're also curious about too is that you have an honorary doctorate for heritage and tourism. Would love it if you can share a little bit more about how that came to be and what that means for you.
Well, it was the most amazing honour. As not an overly academic person, it was a real a massive shock, a complete honour, and it's not something you use. It doesn't. technically I could call myself Dr. Paul, but that would just be ridiculous because I haven't studied for years to have that honour, so that would be wrong. It was I'd done quite a lot of work with Solent University when I was at the Mary Rose. We worked really closely with them, particularly around developing their students. So we did lots on the employability side. So we would take here, we had an intern come in every year that was paid for by the university. We would give them as much experience, and they would very much be part of the management team for a year. So we'd rely on them, we'd get them doing stuff, and they left with this experience that they've all gone on to really good jobs, and I'm all really proud of them. But we also, I went over to university quite a lot, did sort of lectures. We also gave a number of projects to students as well in a number of areas. So I'd worked a lot with the uni, and then suddenly one morning the post came, and there was this letter with this just amazing, would you be willing to accept this honour? I couldn't reply quick enough. Yes, of course I will. It was just, it was just amazing. And it was just to be recognised for your work was just, for me, it was just tremendous. I know I didn't study for it, but I was proud because it had been awarded for just what I'd done in the industry. So yeah, it was a great honour, and fabulous. But yeah, something sits on the CV quite nicely, and we can talk about it now. But yeah, no, and I must say, I loved working with the students from the uni because it was really great. They were all tourism students. I was constantly, and I think because of my experience of doing a similar degree and then going into my career, I was able to sort of, once I was a careers advisor, but able to sort of chat to them about what they needed to do or ways of thinking, and just never always taking that next opportunity. Try never to say no to stuff. Try and be as great, make sure you're noticed, do the customer experience thing, and get stuck into anything that comes up. And our work is about that, isn't it? I think back to one of my first jobs in visitor services. My first job every morning was cleaning the public toilets because we didn't have a cleaning team. Another job I had in my English social days, we had really poor drainage because it was a really historic site. I regularly had to pull up the drains and rod them before major events because they blocked. No, but that's just you've got to do it, haven't you? Because you've got 200 people turning up for an event in half an hour, and they can't have blocked loose. So I love that about our industry, that it is turning your hand to so many different things, and particularly at smaller sites. And I hope many of your listeners are reticent to this, that it is about doing everything, and then turning around and smiling at the last customer of the day and saying thank you for coming. Hope to see you again, because we're giving people great memories, you hope, aren't we? And so that's what we do.
Yeah, Paul, there's something special about all that work that goes into creating the experience, whether it's cleaning the toilets or, cleaning out the drains or whatever it is. And then poof, the gates are open, and it's like, this is the perfect, example of the experience that we want people to show. They don't need to know what was going on behind the scenes. And then, you kind of do it all the next day. So I think that's something that Josh and I have talked about. It's the bug that we get for creating that kind of experience. So it's really, really interesting to hear that that's kind of your path as well.
Yeah, it's great when you people don't want to see that, but actually they always do, because I can remember in my English days at Kenwood, we did a sort of behind the scenes tour where people basically came and visited the offices, and they would sell out every time. And my colleague jovially called it "where the magic happens," and it was just like they'd come up the back staircase and say, oh, "This is the office. This is where our head of operations is." People were fascinated by this, and I think I don't know if you've watched it on Disney Plus, but the Imagineering series was just awesome.
Yeah.
I must have watched it 4 times now, because it was just so fascinating watching how they created the rides, but also it talked a lot about the visitor experience. And I just thought that was just such a fascinating behind the scenes glimpse at what's gone on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Imagineering story is awesome. And then my wife and I recently started watching, I think it's Behind the Attraction. So similar type of style, but then they focused on one specific attraction. You were talking about Disneyland Paris and Tower of Terror there. We were just watching how that was made last night. So but people like to see that behind the scenes glimpse on what's going on. And like Matt mentioned that, we've talked about that, a number of times, of how much work goes into making it look like it all just came to be. Now, when you talk about kind of those, I would say those dirtier jobs of, something, the custodial, elements of it, the cleanliness, sanitation, have you found that people want to see more of that front and center, particularly in the last year and a half, or after you opened, after your, you could say the 9 weeks of lockdown? Do people want to see more of that happening in front of them?
Yeah, I think they wanted to see that a lot. I'll quote someone now, a chap called Bernard Donahue, who you may have come across, who is the chief executive of Abbey. He used this phrase, sanitize your site, not the experience. And I thought that was just so brilliant about people still want to come and have the same experience they had before, but want to know they're going to be safe. And that certainly comes out of all the visitor sentiment research that's gone on, particularly in the UK, that people want to know how safe they are. And before we reopened, my marketing head of marketing, Chrissy, did this amazing video. It's only filmed on the basics filmed on our iPhone, but she then cut in with some footage, and it basically just told people what to expect when we reopened. So it showed people how we were going to queue up a one-way system, never done before, how the tea room was now had a one-way system to the cafe, then you had to go outside, where the toilets were, just really was. And it was so well received. You would not believe how many people commented, wrote to us, thanked us, put stuff on social media, because actually seeing that film before they came made them feel safe and made them think, actually, I'm going to a safe environment and I'm going to have a great experience because I know I'm going to be safe. And people were nervous, and people are still nervous. I'm sure they are in the US. They certainly are in the UK. In theory, we have no restrictions now here, but we still do because, people are nervous. I think you're right. People have wanted to see and know that they're going to be safe and want to see hand sanitizers and wanted to see people in masks. And, we in the UK now, we've got a position where there's no legal requirement to wear a mask, but we're still asking people to do it inside because actually that's making our visitors feel a bit safer, certainly making our staff feel safer. And, we've got to look after our visitors, but we also have to look after our staff, haven't we? They're the most important asset we have. And, they need to feel safe because they're there every day churning out brilliant, excellent customer service. So they need to feel safe and happy in what they're doing as well, in any profession, not just our profession.
Absolutely. Yeah. Paul, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Skip the Queue, the podcast from your side of the pond, because that's how I originally heard of you. And then we've had Kelly Molson on our podcast, and we've both been on hers. A great podcast for the visitor experience industry. But you've been on there, and you've actually turned the tables and been the podcast host with Kelly recently, which I thought was a fascinating episode. So can you give us some insight of what it was like to turn the tables and be the host in that experience?
It's funny because I didn't really see it initially as turning the tables as such. It was just Kelly was chatting on LinkedIn, what a great resource that is, about how she was writing a blog, I think, on the problems of, or not the problems, the joys and the challenges of doing a podcast. And I half jokingly said, we should do this as a Skip the Queue and I'll interview you. And fortunately, would say, "Don't be stupid. That's a really crap idea," But she didn't. She was like, "Oh, it'd be brilliant. Let's do that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then suddenly thought, "Oh, blimey, I'm going to be hosting a podcast," and I never thought I'd be doing that. So, yeah. So, Kelly's such great fun, and the episode you guys did was brilliant, and I loved when you both came on Skip the Queue with Kelly as well. So, she's such a great, lovely person. It's wonderful, and so we had just a great fun of that. And I particularly found that subject fascinating because I think it's become a bit like everyone suddenly wants to do a podcast. And you guys will know this because you deliver one of the best, that people are, there's a lot of hard work involved. And it's not just recording someone chatting and then sticking it on, Spotify or something. It needs editing, it needs subtitling, or it needs, equipment and everything else. So that's why I thought it was brilliant, because it was I hope people found it really interesting that this isn't an easy thing to go and do. And, if they were being pushed by their, senior teams, we must go and do a podcast. Well, actually, there's a lot involved in this, and and different levels, and the work that Kelly had done to get it sorted out, and she's been fab against some such brilliant guests on as well. So so it's a pleasure to do it. It was great fun, and we had great fun doing it, and I think it sounded all right as well. So it's not.
Yeah, we really enjoyed listening to that episode, to that interview with Kelly. So, do you have any questions for us? Do you want to do any interview with us?
Well, right. So, guys, what's your favourite rides? You are the Attraction Pros. So, what's your favourite rides to do?
Matt, you can go first on that. I know we both know each other's answers.
I think we do, yeah. Mine is Fury 325, which is a roller coaster at Carowinds here in North Carolina. It's 325 feet tall, like 95 miles an hour. Smooth and fast, and lots of, out of your seat airtime. And I was just on a coaster trip, and, Josh and I talked a lot about it, but I rode it 14 times that day. And that was just an amazing experience. But I have to say, as I'm getting a little older, I'm looking for the smoother rides, but I'm also looking for those opportunities to reconnect with nature. And, it's just sometimes a walk in the forest can be really rejuvenating. So whenever I get over to Europe and to England, I have to visit Painshill.
Yeah, I look forward to giving you a tour around. It'd be fabulous. So yeah,
it would be. Yeah.
Yeah. And mine is Millennium Forest, which isn't 325 feet. It's only 310 feet. And when I was at Cedar Point a couple of weeks ago, I didn't ride it 14 times, but I did ride it 3 times. So that's been my favorite for, I guess, about 20 years now. That was also my first job in the industry was a ride operator for 2 summers at Millennium Forest at Cedar Point in Ohio. So
it's fabulous. I love where you wouldn't know the dimensions of it and just reeled them off,
I can keep going. But,
You're right.
True pros, yeah.
Yeah. Paul, this has been such an interesting conversation. We really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. As we wind this down, any final message for our audience or words of wisdom?
Gosh, I don't have words of wisdom. I mean, if anyone's up and coming in the industry, I think as we've said earlier, it's that throw your hands to everything, take on everything. Listen to great stuff like you guys talking on your podcast. So there's the Disney ones, that are really really great that you can listen to. That Dan's one and stuff. So just keep learning, keep trying, keep doing everything. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, which is @pgriffiths_PHP. Just give me a shout. I'd love to start a conversation. If anyone wants to continue any stuff we talked about or pick up on that, great. Love chatting to people.
Absolutely. And if people want to know more about Painshill, where would they go?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I should have been pushing that more, shouldn't I? It's the best place to start is our brand new website, which we rebuilt this year, actually, which has been a really great fun thing to do. And that's www.painshill.co.uk.
Excellent. And we'll put all that in the show notes.
At Painshill. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get involved.
Excellent. Awesome. We'll put all that in the show notes for our audience to be able to find it. So Paul, thank you again so much for joining us here on the podcast. We really appreciate your time today. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit AttractionPros.com.